For our second installment in this series, we're going to the Bronx Museum of the Arts to see Abigail DeVille's Bronx Heavens. As soon as you walk in, you're greeted with two structures. The big blue pyramid holds lunar capsule, in which visitors can record a response to a prompt. Some of them being, how many days have you been on Earth? How did you get here? What is your most cherished memory? Right behind it is the black monolith, where you can listen to some of the recordings from the lunar capsule. When you head into the North Gallery, you get a grand display of everything. Abigail explains the significance of the setup and how it reflects back on New York's history.
I kept thinking about that space when you first come into the North Gallery where the family work is as a kind of living room space, even though it didn't turn into one. And then the rest of it is a kind of like an open-ended kind of cosmos that's really talking more about the history of colonialism, in America or in New York specific. Because, even those panels that are on the back wall, like those abstract paintings, like they're really orange and a lot of blue. And like New York is not New England, it was New Amsterdam. So there's like this Dutch history that kind of gets erased a little bit, even though the state flag is the Dutch colors, right? Like of the flag, right? So it's thinking about all of that. Like the sculpture that has like the animal head on it, and it's called Half Moon, based on Henry Hudson's ship, the Half Moon, that he sailed in the Hudson River around, I don't know, 1603, sometime around there.
Aside from New York's histories, we learn about her family's history through her use of her grandmother's belongings.
So I had started using her things back then, but I don't think I really knew what I was doing. Just like because I was inspired by the materials that populated her life, like the material kind of waste or evidence of her existence that was in the apartment. I lived with her for a period of time, and people would just drop off stuff at her apartment that they didn't want, and she ending up with someone's like 10 house plants kind of thing, and her tending to them. But it was the kind of like the democratic nature and generosity of her use of materials, and her being so open to any kind of thing that could pass through the house, that made me more open too as an artist, period.
She also brings up her response to Gordon Matta Clark's Bronx Floors and how her version is different.
So my response in the Bronx Floors that's in the Bronx Museum show is actually the literal floor that was in my grandmother's apartment, and it was originally my great grandmother's apartment from about 1971 to 2012. So the story my dad tells me is that when they laid down the floor, they didn't like seal it right, or they didn't do something correctly, and so the floor was like this ivory colored beige floor, and they were intense smokers, and then the floor was down, like laid down there for 50 years. So it has like this crazy nicotine patina on it, and it's really filthy. But for me, it's also like it's the record of them breathing, right? Like it's the residue of their existence as evidence embedded into the color of the floor tiles. And so it's like an actual Bronx floor versus like the Matta Clark one.
But why these histories? Why is it important to talk about our families and the things that they went through? Abigail believes that their struggles are what brought us here now, to the present day, and her work can help us bring these conversations to the foreground.
So Peter Sellers, he gave a talk at Berkeley, and he said extra strength actually has to do with ancestors, because you're here because of them. And most cultures understand, as my friend Guillermo Gomez Pena says, when he sits in a cafe and sips his cappuccino and writes in his notebook. In his family, there were 20 generations of campesinos in the field before sunrise, working in the field till after dark so that he can sip that cappuccino. And they're waiting for you to do what they were unable to do for centuries. And when you're doing the thing your parents, your grandparents, and great grandparents were incapable of doing, they're supporting you. Yeah, and then that's the accountability in contrast to like the exceptional one, right? Like the individual pursuit of whatever you want, whatever you want. But it's never whatever you want, right? Like there's all of these people behind you. and they are supporting you, what can you do also for them? Like your
Mm-hmm.
life is not really your own. It's also in conjunction with all of these other things. So